What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over 5 wide receivers I believe are absolute steals at their current ADP. Realistically, it's pretty difficult to be a steal, if you're a second or third round pick. So all of the guys that we're going to go over today are going outside the top 25. I believe all but one of them goes outside the top 30. And that's, of course, among wide receivers, right? Not the top 25 overall, the top 25 wide receivers taken in drafts. Unfortunately, I can only talk about so many players each day. And with camp starting up, things change extremely fast. So make sure you're on top of the latest news by looking at our trending players page on the website, which is absolutely free to view. We're posting the most relevant news there every single day and giving our take on what sort of fantasy impact they have as well. But you should also be keeping up to date with our latest rankings page, since that is also constantly updated. So remember, you can find all of that at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So let's get things started off as usual. Today's video with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was among all games where running back had at least 25 carries last season. Which running back had the worst game in terms of yards per carry? The answer is Chase Edmonds. Walking 500 was the first to get that on YouTube, and At The Bigs was the first to get that right on Twitter. Remember, they need to get it right first 10 times to get into the Stat of the Day Hall of Fame. You guys can see on the screen who has done that so far. And everyone who does so, at least all the unique players that do so, unique people that do so, you guys are going to be in this year's subscriber league. And that's probably not going to get us to the full amount. We're probably not going to have 11 unique people win that. And so the rest will be filled with people from the Discord, which of course you have access to by getting all in on the website. I will be contacting people who are going to be part of this league soon, so we can start and get that up and running. But it's going to be sometime like late August when that happens. So today's stat. 2 quarterbacks had at least 60 pass attempts in a game last season. Joe Burrow was one of them. Who was the other? All right, let's talk about some steals. So as I mentioned before, kind of tough to be a steal if you're going in the first, second, third round of the draft. So the first player we're going to talk about today is coming off the board as the wide receiver 27, and then we're going to work backwards in ADP. So everyone is going to be going further than the person I talked about previously. So wide receiver 27 off the board right now is, of course, my boy, Brandon Aiyuk. You had to know he was going to be on this video, right? I mean, he was taken 25th overall last season, and he had a pretty incredible rookie season. The final stat line wasn't just like jaw-dropping, he had 60 for 748 and 5 touchdowns, catching, passes from pretty bad quarterbacks. He did have Jimmy G for a little bit, but overall, the quarterback play was not very good. As for Matt Harmon in reception perception, he had an 88th percentile success rate versus man coverage, 86th percentile success rate versus man coverage, and ran every single route except for the flat at an above average success rate. He is already an elite NFL wide receiver, and initial reports out of camp are extremely positive and paint him as the clear alpha wide receiver, which is not a surprise. Debo is not a number 1 wide receiver, so who do you think, is going to be their X, right? Like this season, we know the quarterback play is going to be solid. We know Jimmy G is coming back, and that even if Jimmy G gets hurt, Jimmy G isn't all that good, well, Trey Lance is waiting for his opportunity. I genuinely do not see a world in which Brandon Aiyuk is a bust. So know that right from the start. Maybe he doesn't come out here and post a top 5 wide receiver season, which, let's be honest, if you're expecting that from the 27th wide receiver off the board, you're being a little bit optimistic, right? No one's expecting him to be a top 5 wide receiver. But I think there's close to a 0 chance that he's a true bust unless he gets hurt, which you could say for everyone. And so getting him as the 27th wide receiver off the board is an incredible value. I understand that this is going to be a lower volume passing attack, but they're going to be more efficient than pretty much every team. And so that's going to make up for a decrease in total volume. Brandon Aiyuk is a stud. He is the #1 receiving weapon at wide receiver in the 49ers. He will rival Kittle as the top receiving option on the team in general, and he has the talent to be a wide receiver 1 this season. I do not think, again, he's going to be top 5, but I truly believe he can be a top 12 wide receiver this season, and at worst, he's going to return value. So there's absolutely no risk in taking him where he goes right now. Next up in ADP, we've got Jeudy coming off the board as the wide receiver 33. He's my wide receiver 28. And this is a bit of a shift for me. I've been pretty high on Sutton for most of the offseason, but I'm beginning to back off that take a little bit. Sutton does come off the board slightly earlier than Jeudy, but he's coming off of his torn ACL, which it seems like he's mostly recovered from, but he's clearly not 100% yet. He's going to start camp with the brace. He's not 100%. And we're not like that far from the start of the season. And we can't really know how much of an impact this is going to have on Sutton. Like we just don't know. There's a lot of unknowns there. One thing that we do know though is that Jeudy was bad from a production standpoint as a rookie. Didn't have great numbers, very inefficient, wasn't great in fantasy. But he showed us why he was valued so highly coming out of the draft. He had an 87th percentile success rate versus man coverage, a 75th percentile success rate versus the press. He was already one of the elite separators in the NFL, and he did everything that we thought he could do. They just struggled getting him the football. With Sutton back, this offense should get more efficient, and defenses won't be able to put as much of a focus on Jeudy. And just like with Aiyuk, he was dominant as a rookie and a young one at that. I mean, he just turned 22. So this isn't me saying some 28, 29-year-old wide receiver is finally going to have that breakout season, right? Because I think they improved from their 27-year-old season to their 28-year-old season. You know, when players get older, we kind of know what they are. But we hear all the time how much more comfortable wide receivers are entering their second and their third seasons. And that makes complete sense, right? Especially after getting basically no work in before last season began because of the pandemic. It's absolutely possible and honestly likely that Aiyuk and Jeudy will be better wide receivers this season, running crisper routes, gaining more separation. And if they improve at all, they're already going to be in the top 10% of wide receiver talent. So getting players like that in the middle rounds, well, that's what we need to be doing. Another player that fits a very similar mold going even later in the draft is Michael Pittman. Comes off the board as a wide receiver 47, but he's my wide receiver 37. Pittman wasn't nearly as good as Aiyuk and Jeudy were in their rookie seasons, but he also cost significantly less in drafts, and there's plenty of optimism around him. First off, he wasn't bad, right? Like I said, he wasn't as good as Aiyuk because Aiyuk was already elite, but he was pretty good. I mean, 75th percentile success rate versus man, 56th percentile success rate versus the press, both really solid numbers. Also, a quick note on that, I use success rate a lot. Whenever I use those stats, at least talking about versus man versus the press, it's from Matt Harmon's Reception Perception, which I highly recommend everyone checks out. I believe it's receptionperception.com. No, I am not affiliated with him. I have never even spoken to him, but I enjoy his content, and that is where the statistics come from. So when I talk about success rate versus man, success rate versus press, we can trust these numbers. I do trust him. They're good stats. But anyways, he was still, a well above average wide receiver as a rookie, and he fits the mold of like a true number one. He's 6'4", 223 pounds, 93rd percentile speed score, and he's really, really good on deep routes. And the problem last season was that Phillip Rivers was like half deceased, and so Pittman was incredible. Corner routes, go routes, but they couldn't really give him many of those because Rivers couldn't throw the ball that far, right? Like it's no use if you're getting open deep if you can't get the ball to that player. So that's why I'm excited about Wentz, not because I think Wentz is some god, but because he can at least throw it deep. He can at least get the ball downfield. Also, look at the Colts depth chart. Pittman, Hilton, Campbell, Pascal. I mean, I love Paris Campbell. But he's clearly not an alpha wide receiver, right? Hilton had a great career, but he's mostly dust at this point. Pascal is like a fine rotational piece, but I mean, he's no real threat. Pittman is the clear X wide receiver on this offense. And we saw that unfolding in their playoff game against the Bills when he had 10 targets and a carry. Was clearly a featured part of this offense. It's going to be Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman. Those are the pieces you want on the Colts. I mean, there's virtually no risk. I guess that's another thing. Like, I don't think there's much risk in anyone I've talked about today. Like, there's virtually no risk in Pittman, right? At worst, he's going to return value as the 47th best wide receiver, but there's definitely risk in fading him because he has a lot of upside if he can break out and be a clear number one for them. And if you're allowing your league mates to capture that sort of upside as a wide receiver 47, you could be in trouble if you're fading him in all your leagues. So if I'm in like 3 leagues, you better believe I'm going to have Pittman in at least one of them. Moving even later in the draft, let's go to the wide receiver 57 off the board, 48 in my rankings, Marvin Jones. I still think that Laviska is the wide receiver to own in Jacksonville. My rankings reflect that, so that has not changed. But he also goes significantly earlier, and there's a very real chance that Marvin Jones is used as a downfield threat, as a possession wide receiver, and as a red zone target. And the lead red zone target, the lead downfield threat. This was a horrible offseason for wide receivers, right? The market was just non-existent for them. And yet the Jaguars gave Marvin Jones a 2-year, $12.5 million contract with $9 million of that guaranteed. Jones is very clearly going to be a big part of this offense, and it's an offense that will be taking a step forward now that Trevor Lawrence is under center. Also, Marvin Jones has been productive. He's been between 53 and 69 receiving yards per game in each of the last 6 years and has 32 touchdowns over his last 54 games, which is very impressive. He's also 31, but hasn't shown signs of taking a step back like other wide receivers have because he's not a speed receiver, right? When you see fast, deep threats, guys that win off of their speed alone, when they get up to 29, 30, 31, we take notice because usually they have a drop-off. But he doesn't win in that area. It's not his speed and his quickness where he wins at. It's in contested catches. Like you throw the ball up and Marvin Jones is coming down with it. And so he doesn't need to be gaining elite separation, which means that he's going to have a really nice age curve to his career. We're not going to see a steep drop off in the production of Marvin Jones because he's not winning in the areas you'd expect to decline. It's a skill set also that the Jaguars needed. They didn't have someone that they could just throw the ball up and come down with it. That's not Laviska's game. Laviska's great, but that's not his game. It's not Chark's game. It's Marvin Jones. And so he filled a need for this team. People seem to have Chark just crowned as the clear number 1, but I really don't think that's a lock. I think Chark could be their number 3 this season. Marvin Jones, he's not going to break out, and be some dominant wide receiver that we've just never seen from him in the past, but he could absolutely be more valuable in fantasy than DJ Chark and be a weekly flex option with the ceiling we're looking for, right? Because in flex, we like to have players that, they have a low-ish floor, but they can explode for massive weeks, and I think that's what Marvin Jones is going to provide this season, and getting him as a wide receiver 57 off the board is absolutely a steal. Final wide receiver we'll go over today is Emmanuel Sanders. Sanders currently the 66th wide receiver off the board. He's my wide receiver 61 right now, but that's going to change when I push through after recording this. I'm going to go through, do another set of adjustments later today, and he's going to move up. I don't know exactly where he'll be, but it's going to be in roughly the mid-50s is kind of where I'm guessing he'll end up. Maybe he ends up in the low 50s, but I'm thinking the mid-50s. Much like with Marvin Jones, we want to follow the money, right? We cannot trust what teams are saying, but we can trust when they spend draft picks and when they spend money on players. They can't lie to us then. If they're going to give someone money, it means they want them, right? And the Bills, in this awful offseason for wide receivers, they gave him a 1-year, fully guaranteed $6 million contract, and that's after, a few seasons of targeting him aggressively. They were trying to trade for Emmanuel Sanders. They have wanted him for a while. It is very clear that they like him. They had a void to fill with John Brown gone. Now, I thought to start the offseason that Gabriel Davis was going to fill that role. But the more I think about it, the less likely I believe that is. Davis is not a bad wide receiver. I think he's a really good young talent, but I don't think he's going to win number 2 job. He could. I just think it's less likely. I think Emmanuel Sanders is probably going to fill that role. I think what's most likely to happen is that Diggs is the clear one. We know that for 100% certainty. Diggs is the guy. Then I think they use Sanders as a more traditional number 2, and they use Davis as more of a downfield threat because that's where he's best at. He's a really, really good downfield threat. He's still a little bit raw in other areas and gaining separation, beating man coverage, but he's great downfield. And so I think they utilize that, keep Diggs as the 1, and Sanders is more traditional 2. And if we're thinking who has the best chance to be a weekly starter for us, so maybe a wide receiver 2, you got to think Diggs probably has to go down for that. I think that Sanders has the upside to be used in the flex at times, to be used as a streamer. You've got bye weeks, you've got injuries, you've got terrible matchups. You want to throw Emmanuel Sanders in there in a game that has a 55, 60 point total. Sure, I think that's viable. But if we're also thinking about, what's the upside? If one of these can be a wide receiver 2, is it Emmanuel Sanders and Gabriel Davis? I think Emmanuel Sanders is more likely to fill that role because if Diggs goes down, I don't see them shifting Gabriel Davis into that number 1 spot. I think that they went out and got Sanders because they trust him. He's a proven wide receiver. I just think that he is most likely to lead the team in targets if Diggs went down. And under that scenario, he's probably a wide receiver 2. So getting him to 66 wide receiver off the board is a really nice value. And honestly, when you're looking in this range, you're not looking for a guy that's going to be a weekly wide receiver 2. If you're in the 60s for wide receiver, you're not getting a wide receiver 2. But I do think, again, that he can be a viable streamer while Diggs is healthy, and you're just waiting for a potential injury for him to truly have a breakout season. And since Davis also, he goes a decent amount before Emmanuel Sanders in drafts, he's the second wide receiver taken, I think that since I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to be more valuable on average and has that higher ceiling, I think it's pretty easy. You wait, take a huge discount on Emmanuel Sanders because that's just the best value. We're always looking for value at any point in the draft. So those are 5 wide receivers that I personally think are steals right now. This time of year has a lot of moving pieces though. We learn a ton of new information every single day, and things are going to constantly be changing. So please make sure you're up to date on the latest news with our trending players page, and keep checking the site for the latest rankings for your specific league format. We have a ton of information over there, and it's going to remain updated with the latest news. So please check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? But thanks for watching.